So I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to try out this amazing new wide-angle zoom lens from Canon, the RF10-20 F4 L IS lens. So we'll take a look at general performance and image quality, and I'm also going to put it up against my current wide-angle zoom lens, the Canon RF15-35. So first of all, let's dive in and take a closer look at this lens before we get out there and take a look at what it can do. So the first thing I noticed about this lens is just how surprisingly light it is, weighing in at just 560 grams, and it is nice and small too. The lens sits really nicely on the front of the Canon R5 for example, and it's not front heavy at all, and you barely notice it on the front of your camera as a result. I found it to be really nice to use out in the field, whether on a tripod or handheld. On the body itself, it has two switches, one to toggle between manual and autofocus, and another to turn on and off the built-in lens stabilization. The lens, like all other RF lenses, has a command dial as well as a nice smooth zoom ring. This lens also has a constant f4 aperture throughout its entire zoom range, and it also zooms completely internally. An added extra that you don't see on all RF lenses is this extra function button on the barrel of the lens too. Something that you need to know about a lens this wide is about that front glass, and it is a domed front element. So that means that you cannot use front filters with this lens. An important thing to note if you are planning on using this lens for video, as it means no screw-on front filters, I'm afraid. Okay, now that we've checked out the lens, let's check out what it can do in a couple of these shots that I took outdoors earlier in the week. And let me tell you straight away, this lens is epic. It captures architecture and landscapes with incredible detail, and despite how wide it goes, pretty well corrected too. Right off the bat, I noticed how colours, contrast and sharpness are all excellent in these really detailed images. The wider end of this zoom range makes things in the foreground appear enormous and really shows scale and depth in an image. This can make compositions more difficult because of how much it captures, and you really have to pay attention to your foreground. Another thing is that it's so wide you have to be stood really close to your subject, so if you're taking a picture of a stream, you might actually be stood in the stream to get the kind of shot you want. Let's take a quick look at the various focal lengths included in this zoom range, such as 20mm, 15mm and 10mm, to give you an idea of the kind of range you get with this lens. 10 to 20mm might seem like quite a short focal range given that it's just over the span of 10mm, but the difference in each millimeter is quite large, especially as you get wider than 16mm. So if you find yourself shooting wide angle often, then this is actually a really versatile focal range. But as great as this lens is outdoors, it absolutely excels when shooting indoors, especially in tight spaces. This lens can make small rooms appear huge or grand, and makes large spaces appear vast and even larger than life. This is such a great lens for capturing interiors, as each focal length is just so useful, providing a very useful range indoors, as you can see here. It's also, I'm sure, an excellent zoom range when it comes to things like night skies and starscape photography. Looking at this image, it performs really well other than some smearing of the stars in the extreme borders of the image. Which actually brings me on to lens corrections, where this lens relies heavily on those corrections, especially on the wide end. So here's a shot at 10mm, the lens's widest focal length, and now here is a shot without those corrections turned on, the raw image. Now that is extreme mechanical vignetting, where the lens is so wide you can see the edges of the barrel or the lens hood in the image. So to fix this in post, the lens corrections actually crops off some of the extreme borders of the image to get rid of this. The image is then stretched a little bit to compensate for that crop and the distortion, which leads to the smearing of details in the corners of the image, like you can see here. So you can see here, if we zoom in on this tree right at the edge of the image, in the uncorrected image on the left, it is very sharp. But the digitally corrected image on the right has not only removed some of our field of view, but has also stretched the tree out of shape and reduced some of the clarity as a result. But to be fair, a lot of lenses these days rely on these kinds of digital corrections, especially wider angle Canon lenses I've noticed. And as bad as it looks, this lens still puts in an excellent performance in terms of sharpness. I took these shots, which are full of detail at various focal lengths and apertures, and found performance to be really good with this lens edge to edge. Center performance at every single focal length and aperture is absolutely excellent in terms of sharpness, with absolutely no need to step down to see any improvement to its already excellent resolution. At the edge of the frame at 10mm, sharpness is still excellent, with no real improvement seen when you step the lens down. And this remains consistent for both 15mm and 20mm. You really can't use this lens at any focal length and any aperture and be confident in the result that you're going to get from it. So guys, this video is sponsored by Squarespace, which is my go-to platform to use when building my own photography portfolio website. And it's been that way for me for years, as the thing I love the most about Squarespace is that you don't need any skills in, say, coding, designing websites, or creating websites to get started and create your own awesome website. Thanks to Squarespace's easy to use fluid engine, a lot of the changes you might want to make to your website is a simple case of drag and drop, for example, so anybody can get started and build a website fast. Squarespace also offers amazing customizable galleries so you can show off your images in style. But if you have products to sell, whether that be physical or digital, well, Squarespace gives you all the tools you need to create an online store and shopfront to start selling quickly and easily. So if you're ready to dive in and start creating and designing your own perfect website, well, head on over to squarespace.com/JamesReader for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code JamesReader. All right, let's get back to the video. So now let's compare this lens to another amazing Canon wide angle zoom lens, the RF15-35 2.8 lens. The first thing to look at is the difference in just how wide these two lenses can go when out in the real world. So here's a look at this interior shot, first at 10mm and now at 15mm on the RF15-35. Both are amazing, but the extra width of 10mm really makes this image look larger than life. And I do notice straight away there's quite a bit more micro contrast in the 15-35 image though. The 10-20mm is definitely the better lens for interiors though, especially if you're looking in the style of, say, real estate photography. Here's this living room shot first at 15mm, where with nothing to compare it to, it does look great until you see the 12mm shot, which makes the space look so much bigger and captures a surprising amount more of the room. Now at 10mm, wider still, can make these average sized rooms look huge, and if you're in real estate, this can really make your work stand out above the rest. And the same counts for interior videos too. Here's a walk through this hall at 15mm, which does look great and is plenty wide for a large space like this. It's worth noting the wobbling and artifacting in the corners though, because it's about to get a lot worse when we swap over to 10mm. This focal length in video looks epic, and the wider focal length and built-in lens image stabilization make for some really smooth footage, but the wobbling at the corners is very bad now. A gimbal would definitely reduce this and is an absolute must for this style of video anyway. And again, here's a look at the same type of video but in a smaller space, showing as we get wider in the focal range just how much more of an average size room is captured. In general, the super wide focal lengths of say 10-12mm make for a really unique look in video. It makes for an almost full frame action camera look and offers lots of creative opportunities. But back on the topic of comparing range between these two zoom lenses, let's not forget that the 15-35 can zoom out a considerable amount more than the maximum 20mm on the 10-20 lens. In a shot like this, look how much more reach you get when stood in the same position, with the 15-35 being able to zoom out to 35mm. To me, this makes the 15-35 lens a little bit more versatile when it comes to, say, travel photography where you need more reach, or maybe portrait photography where you want those more flattering, longer focal lengths. So now let's compare sharpness and general performance between the RF 10-20 and the RF 15-35 at similar focal lengths. So first of all, even when using Lightroom's built-in lens corrections, the RF 10-20 is the better corrected lens in terms of distortion at 15mm. The 15-35 at its widest focal length has quite a bit more pincushion distortion, as you can see here. And in terms of sharpness, without going overboard into the details, let's take a look at my findings here. So center frame at every comparable focal length and aperture, they are both incredibly sharp, and to be honest, there is no real winner. The 15-35, however, does consistently have more micro contrast, as you can see here, especially in the finer details in the brick, which can make for a more punchy looking image. Now everywhere else in the frame, although they match up well, I have found the RF 10-20 to be the much more consistent lens, edge to edge, especially in the mid frame compared to the RF 15-35. A constant issue I have with my 15-35 is with soft spots, especially in the mid frame. This is completely absent on the RF 10-20, which maintains a consistent level of sharpness from the center frame right across to the edges, at least until you get to the absolute extremities of those corrected areas at least. Here's an example at 15mm mid frame, where the 10-20 is nice and sharp as you would expect, but the 15-35 is pretty much soft. This is on the left side of the image, which is better than the right side, where again the 10-20 is very sharp and the 15-35 is downright soft. This is caused by field curvature on the 15-35, I believe, and have heard this complaint from many other users of this lens. Push out further to the edge and again they match up quite nicely, but I would say that the 10-20 performs slightly better in terms of sharpness and clarity though. So for images where sharpness across the entire frame is important, the 10-20 delivers this at the cost of a reduced focal range and a slower maximum aperture. If you want to take a look and do further comparisons for yourself between these two lenses, I took a whole bunch more photos at various focal lengths and apertures that you don't even see in this video, and I uploaded them to my Dropbox. So feel free to download them and see for yourself and come to your own conclusions. I think in total I have shared around about 100 images from this lens, so hopefully that will help you make your own mind up. So now let's compare build quality and general handling between the RF 10-20 and the RF 15-35 2.8. First of all, comparing the 10-20 to the 15-35, you'll see the big size difference, especially when you take into account the fact that the 10-20 zooms internally, whereas the 15-35 zooms externally. Because of this, the 10-20 feels a little bit more solid against dust and the elements. The biggest difference to take into account is definitely that front element, which is domed on the 10-20, which means no screw-on front filters. Compare that to the flat front element of the 15-35, which allows for 82mm filters. Other than that, they are both built extremely well and perform extremely well. So that's my review of this lens, and I found it to be overall an absolutely excellent performer and a really fun yet difficult lens to use. So for landscapes and the kinds of things I shoot, I personally prefer that range of 15-35. But if I shot interiors, then without a doubt the RF 10-20 is the best lens I have ever used for that kind of content. This is not a cheap lens at all, coming in at over £2,500, whereas a lens that gets you almost as wide like the 14-35 f4 comes in at just about half the price. But the RF 10-20 is a specialist lens in my opinion, and one that can earn you a living and set your work apart from the rest. And if you're a professional working in any of the areas that this lens excels at, you probably already know whether you need this lens or not. As I said earlier, I've uploaded a ton of raw photo files from this video that you can download and check out the performance of this lens for yourself. And the link to the Dropbox to download those are in the description below. So let me know down in the comments what you think about this RF 10-20 lens, and if it is a lens you would consider picking up. And if not, let me know down in the comments what is the widest lens that you own. Thanks as always for watching. I hope that this video was useful, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.